The rain was coming down hard outside, pelting against the windows like 1,000 tiny fingers trying to claw their way inside. I sighed and glanced at the clock on the wall, watching the minutes tick by as if they were moving in slow motion. The school lockdown had been going on for what felt like hours, and the tension in the classroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. It had all started innocently enough. The principal's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a lockdown due to an unidentified threat in the area. We were assured it was just a precaution, that everything would be fine. But as time passed, the unease grew, and the initial boredom gave way to a creeping sense of dread. I tried to distract myself by doodling on my notebook, but the sound of distant footsteps echoing in the hallway made my heart race. My classmates exchanged worried glances, and I could practically feel the fear in the air. Miss Thompson, our teacher, was doing her best to keep us calm, but even she seemed on edge. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. A chorus of gasps and startled screams filled the air. Emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie red glow across the room. Someone started to cry, their sobs echoing like a haunting melody. "Everyone stay quiet," Miss Thompson's voice trembled. "It's probably just a power outage. We'll be back to normal soon." But her words did little to ease our anxiety. The footsteps in the hallway grew louder, closer. It was as if someone, or something, was getting closer to our classroom. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat trickled down my spine. I exchanged a nervous glance with my best friend Sarah, who was clutching her pendant so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The footsteps reached our door, and my breath caught in my throat. The handle jiggled, and the door creaked open slowly. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim red light. It was a tall, shadowy shape, and my mind immediately conjured up images of all the horror movies I'd watched. "Who's there?" Miss Thompson's voice wavered as she took a step forward. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it took a deliberate step into the room. And that's when I noticed its eyes. 2 pinpricks of sickly green light that seemed to glow in the darkness. A shiver ran down my spine, and I realized that whatever was standing in front of us was definitely not human. A nervous giggle escaped my lips, and to my surprise, a few other chuckles followed suit. It was almost as if the absurdity of the situation was finally sinking in. Here we were, trapped in a dark classroom during a lockdown, facing a mysterious creature straight out of a horror movie. "Is that a monster?" Sarah whispered, her voice a mixture of fear and disbelief. The creature's head tilted to the side as if studying us. Then, to everyone's astonishment, it raised a hand and waved, its long fingers curling in a strangely friendly gesture. I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter, the tension releasing from my body like a valve being opened. The others hesitated, and then one by one, they joined in. It was as if our laughter was a shield against the fear that had taken hold of us. The creature seemed to react to our laughter, its shoulders shaking in what could only be described as silent laughter of its own. It was ridiculous. A group of terrified students and a mysterious otherworldly being sharing a moment of absurd humor in the midst of a lockdown gone wrong. Miss Thompson, looking bewildered but relieved, managed to find her voice. "I suppose we should introduce ourselves." The creature's eyes flickered, and then it spoke, not in words, but in a series of strange gurgles and clicks that somehow managed to convey meaning. It introduced itself as Zog, a being from a distant galaxy, who had accidentally stumbled upon our world during a cosmic adventure. As Zog spoke, the fear that had gripped us began to fade, replaced by a mixture of curiosity and amazement. Zog shared stories of its travels and experiences, and we found ourselves captivated by its tales. The lockdown, the rain, the darkness, they all faded into the background as we listened to the tales of this unlikely visitor. Eventually, the power was restored, and the lockdown was lifted. Zog assured us that it meant no harm and was simply passing through. As it prepared to leave, it gave each of us a small, glowing crystal as a token of its visit. And just like that, Zog was gone, disappearing into the rainy night as mysteriously as it had appeared. The next day at school, the whole experience felt like a dream, too surreal to be true. But when I looked at the crystal sitting on my desk, glowing softly, I knew that our spooky and unexpected encounter had been real. So the next time a lockdown is announced, I won't just think of it as a source of fear and tension. I'll remember the day when a lockdown gone wrong turned into an unforgettable encounter with a friendly, funny, and surprisingly spooky intergalactic traveler named Zog. The school bell had just rung, signaling the end of another mundane day of classes. I packed my bag with a sense of relief, ready to head home and forget about algebra and history for a while. But as I made my way to the exit, I noticed something was off. The usually bustling hallways were eerily quiet, devoid of the usual chatter and laughter. I frowned, glancing at my phone to check the time. It was only 15 minutes past the final bell. Maybe everyone had cleared out quickly today, I thought, trying to shrug off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. As I pushed open the heavy front doors, I froze in my tracks. A strange mist had rolled in, shrouding the school grounds in an eerie haze. It was as if the world had been dipped in gray, and the air felt heavy and cold. I could barely make out the outline of the familiar trees and buildings that I had walked past countless times before. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life, making me jump. "Attention all students and staff," the principal's voice echoed, sounding more tense than usual. "We are currently under a lockdown due to a security breach. Please return to your classrooms and await further instructions." My heart raced as I turned back towards the school building. This was no ordinary lockdown. The mist seemed to thicken around me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I stumbled back inside and made my way to my classroom, where I found a few other students already gathered. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, looked as puzzled and worried as we did. "I've never seen anything like this," she admitted, glancing out the window at the swirling mist. "We should stay put until we know what's going on." Minutes turned into hours, and the mist showed no signs of dissipating. The daylight outside faded into an eerie twilight, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Our attempts to contact the outside world failed. No calls, no internet, nothing. We were cut off from the rest of the world. As the hours dragged on, nervous whispers filled the room. Some speculated that it was a chemical leak, while others whispered about ghosts or supernatural forces at play. The atmosphere was a mixture of fear and grim amusement. After all, it felt like we were living in a horror movie. Then, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. The mist outside the classroom door seemed to swirl and twist, taking on sinister shapes that seemed to move on their own. The footsteps grew closer, and a chilling realization dawned on us. Whatever was out there was not human. Mrs. Henderson rushed to lock the classroom door, her hands trembling. "Everyone stay quiet and stay away from the windows," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. As we huddled in the corner of the room, the mist seemed to seep through the cracks around the door, filling the room with its cold, damp presence. I could feel it crawling along my skin, sending shivers down my spine. The footsteps stopped just outside our door, and the mist seemed to gather, coalescing into a shadowy figure. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging us into darkness. The room was silent, save for the sound of our ragged breaths. Suddenly, a voice spoke, not from the hallway but from right behind us. "Looking for a way out, are we?" We turned, our eyes wide with terror, and saw a figure standing in the corner of the room. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its grin was unsettlingly wide. It was as if the darkness itself had taken on a form. The figure stepped forward, and we could see its twisted, contorted features. It seemed to shift and change, its form becoming fluid and indistinct. A wave of nausea swept over me as I realized that this entity was something beyond our comprehension, a being that defied the laws of reality. "I feed on fear," it whispered, its voice a chilling melody. "And you, my dear children, are serving me a feast tonight." As the entity advanced, Mrs. Henderson grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and swung it with all her might. The entity let out a bone-chilling shriek, its form dissipating like smoke. The lights flickered back on, and the mist outside the door began to recede. The lockdown had ended, and as the mist cleared, the normal world returned. But the memory of that night still haunts me. We never spoke of it again, and Mrs. Henderson retired soon after, her face etched with a fear that would never fade. So now, whenever I hear the word lockdown, my mind drifts back to that nightmarish day when a routine school lockdown turned into a night of terror, and we came face to face with an entity that defied all reason and logic. And I can't help but wonder, what else is out there, lurking just beyond our understanding, waiting for the right moment to make itself known? The school lockdown alarm echoed through the halls, sending a chill down my spine. Lockdown drills were familiar, but this time something was different. The teachers' usually composed faces were etched with worry as they hurriedly ushered us into the designated classroom. I found a seat near the window and glanced outside. Dark clouds had gathered, casting an ominous hue over the school. Miss Anderson, our history teacher, paced at the front of the room, trying to maintain a sense of calm. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to stay quiet and hidden until we get the all clear." As we settled in, the wind outside began to howl, and rain lashed against the windows like bony fingers tapping on glass. The power flickered, and the lights dimmed before plunging us into near darkness. The only source of light was the faint glow of emergency exit signs and the occasional lightning flash. Nervous whispers spread among my classmates, but Miss Anderson's stern look silenced them. We waited, the silence only broken by the storm's fury outside. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, and tension hung in the air like a heavy fog. Then a loud crash echoed from the hallway, making us jump. The classroom door swung open, and a panicked student stumbled inside, his clothes drenched from the rain. He looked around, eyes wide with fear. "They're out there," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "Who's out there?" Miss Anderson demanded, her voice quivering. Before he could answer, a bone-chilling scream pierced the air, followed by a chorus of eerie laughter that seemed to echo from all directions. My heart raced as the sound grew closer, and the emergency lights flickered and buzzed as if struggling to stay on. The new student backed into a corner, his face pale as a ghost. "They're not human," he whispered. "I saw them in the hallway, their eyes were glowing." Miss Anderson rushed to the door, her curiosity overcoming her fear. She peered into the hallway, and her scream echoed ours as she stumbled back, her face drained of color. Outside the windows, figures moved through the mist-shadowy, twisted forms with glowing eyes that seemed to fixate on us. The laughter grew louder, a cacophony of sinister amusement that sent shivers down my spine. "We have to do something," someone cried out. The emergency light sputtered and died, plunging us into darkness. Panic erupted as the laughter seemed to close in, surrounding us. I could hear the sound of footsteps, irregular and disjointed, like bones clacking together. A flashlight clicked on, illuminating the terrified faces of my classmates. It was Adam, a quiet kid who always sat in the back. His hands were shaking, but he held the light steady, casting a narrow beam into the darkness. In that dim light, I caught a glimpse of the figures outside, their grotesque features twisted into mocking grins, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. The door rattled as if something was trying to get in, and the walls seemed to reverberate with the sound of eerie whispers. "Stay back," Adam shouted, his voice quaking. "I don't know what they are, but the light keeps them away." For hours we huddled together, Adam's flashlight the only thing standing between us and those malevolent entities. The storm outside raged on, a symphony of thunder and rain that seemed to be in sync with our racing hearts. As dawn broke, the creatures began to retreat, their laughter fading into the distance. The school's intercom crackled to life, announcing that the lockdown was over. Miss Anderson, who had been clutching her chest in fear, managed to regain some composure. The daylight slowly filtered into the room, chasing away the lingering shadows. We stumbled out of the classroom, our faces pale and our nerves frayed. The hallway was filled with teachers and administrators, all wearing expressions of shock and disbelief. No one could explain what had happened. The security cameras had malfunctioned, and the storm had disrupted communication with the outside world. It was as if the school had been cut off from reality, left to face an unknown horror. In the aftermath, the incident was hushed up. There were no official explanations, no news reports. It was as if the school had been trapped in a nightmare that nobody wanted to remember. But I remember. I remember the glowing eyes, the haunting laughter, and the feeling of being utterly powerless in the face of an unimaginable terror. And when the school lockdown alarm sounds again, I can't help but shiver, wondering if those twisted entities are still out there, waiting for the chance to cross over into our world once more.